On today's episode of You Asked, should you go with a 77-inch Sony A95L or a 65-inch Bravia 8 Mark II? Will the expected iPhone 17 Air have poor battery life? And is burn-in still a problem on some of the latest OLED TVs? Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris Hagan, a video producer at Digital Trends, and this is You Asked, the show where we answer your tech questions. If you've got something you want to know, send your question to youasked@digitaltrends.com, and don't forget to tune in every Sunday at 7:45 a.m. Pacific to see if your question has been selected for the show. We're going to jump right into it this week with a question from Peter, who asks, best TV at 55 inches, OLED or mini LED? So Peter could have asked this one or two ways. Does he mean, is an OLED or mini LED TV the better buy at 55 inches? Or he could be asking for the best 55-inch TV, whether it's OLED or mini LED. I'll try to answer both as well as I can. First, the latter. What's the best TV, whether it's OLED or mini LED? I'll just lay out an objective answer and let you decide your budget. If you want the best mini LED TV, from what my eyes have seen, it's the Sony Bravia 9. It's also on the pricey side, but if you want the best, that's what it is. Of course, TCL's QM8 and the Hisense U8 series are also great bang for your buck options that narrow the gap with Samsung and Sony every year. Also, we do have buying guides on the YouTube channel and digitaltrends.com that can give you everything you need to know as well. For the best OLED, well, we start to split hairs at the top between Sony, Samsung, LG, and Panasonic, but maybe the answer to which type of TV is better for a 55-inch TV will help. Rather objectively, in terms of HDR performance and overall picture quality, the answer between which type of TV is the better buy is OLED. We're talking all the deep blacks and contrast you could want. And since your eyes notice contrast the most, if you put the two side by side, the OLED would stand out. However, if that's the route you're going, we also need to talk about price and availability. Sansui shook things up a little bit with the release of their 55-inch OLED running Google TV for just $799 in the fall, and they're expected to release larger sizes this year. That would be the most affordable option and a really good option if you don't mind the few corners they cut to keep the price down. We've got a previous video that explains a bit more. Now, a little more expensive would be LG's C4 and C5, the 2024 and 2025 options, as well as Samsung's S90D and S90F, which also represent their 2024 and 2025 options. I list options for both years because it's about this time of year, May 2025, when this video is being published, that you should be able to find some of the best deals on the previous year's models. And in most cases, the differences between these upper tier TVs are rather minor year over year. So if you can save a few $100s and maybe even more than that, that's probably gonna be the better buy. Now, if you want the best of the best, LG's G4 or G5, Panasonic's Z95A, or Samsung's S95D or S95F can be included as well. Note, though, that the Samsung options here do have their anti-reflection screen, which people have very different opinions on. Now, I know I listed like every notable OLED TV, but it's a fairly vague question. And Peter, you may also notice that I didn't list any Sony OLED TVs, but that's because I'll address that in the next question, which comes from Billy. He says, I wanted to add the Sony A95L 77-inch to my home theater, but now I'm hearing about the Sony Bravia 8 Mark II. I like the 77-inch size, and the new Bravia 8 tops out at only 65 inches. Am I okay going with the A95L, or will I regret it? Billy, straight up, I'd go with the 77-inch A95L and never look back. In this case, it sounds like size matters most to you and your home theater needs. And with the Bravia 8 Mark II not meeting that size requirement, I think that would be more disappointing than not having the absolute latest TV. As noted quite a bit on this channel, Sony's picture processing is often years ahead of the competition, meaning the A95L, despite being a 2-year-old model, still delivers when compared to a lot of newer TVs. In our previous studio, the A95L was the TV that would usually go back on top of the media console when we weren't filming a review on another. And every time I sat down to watch something on it, I always said, wow, despite all the TVs I've gotten footage of, this one still stands out. Billy, I think you'll feel the same way going with the 77-inch version. And to put a bow on Peter's question, if I had to go with a 55-inch Sony OLED TV, I'd save $1,300 and go with the A95L instead of the Bravia 8 Mark II, unless I had just deep pockets to justify it in this economy. The next question comes from a username that I stand no chance at deciphering, but it reads, is the Samsung S95D or LG G4 the better buy? The S95D is $300 cheaper than the G4 where I live. Great question between a pair of 2024 models that have been put head to head quite often. Now, in most cases, when debating between two TVs that are both really incredible, I'd go with whichever one saved me the money, so long as there were no other deal breakers. But in this case, there may be in Samsung's matte coating that reduces reflections. We did a video comparing that in these two TVs specifically, so it is 100% worth the watch. But the TLDR is, if your TV will be placed somewhere that has a lot of light, potentially causing distracting reflections in the TV screen, the Samsung will probably suit you best. But if the TV's in a darker room, things really come down to a personal preference. I don't think you can go wrong either way. And that leads me to the next pair of questions, which I'll combine into one here. The first asks about the S95D and G4 in particular, asking if burn-in is an issue with either of them. And the other asks about burn-in in general. Is it a thing of the past? So I'll preface this answer by saying that I am no burn-in expert or scientist, but I do know that year over year, as technology improves, burn-in becomes less of a risk. A lot of that is thanks to smart features integrated into OLED TVs. Samsung offers a pixel shift setting, which moves the image slightly to keep static images from being displayed in the same part of the screen for long periods of time, which could lead to burn-in. They also have an adjust logo brightness feature. LG offers similar features in the form of screen shift, logo luminance adjustment, and pixel refreshment. But what's more, with LG in particular, is a 5-year warranty on the G4 OLED. This covers panel replacement, parts, and labor for the first 3 years, and then just panel replacement for the final 2. It's a very safe buy. When my parents replaced their living room TV, I was hesitant to recommend an OLED because I know they watch primarily sports and network news, programming with lots of static elements on the screen. But I did end up recommending an OLED because it just looks so good and I knew they'd love it. And I was right. Their Samsung S90D is still going strong, and every time I talk to them, they tell me how much they love the picture. If they've avoided burn-in, I think anyone can. Next, we'll head over to senior mobile writer Andy Boxall.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to be back answering your mobile questions, and we've got some great ones this week. The first is very timely and asks, should we expect the iPhone 17 Air's battery life to be atrocious? Well, yes, probably. But it does always depend on how much you use your phone and what you do on it when you are using it. However, it seems even early in the game, Apple is preparing us for short battery life from its thin phone. A report claimed Apple expects the battery to last for a full day for 60 to 70% of its owners, and that's down from 80 to 90% for the iPhone 16 series. To compensate, it's apparently considering reintroducing the MagSafe battery pack to help the phone's battery push through an entire day. Of course, attaching a battery pack will immediately negate the phone's big selling point, its thinness, making it all a whole problem entirely of Apple's own making. It's a timely discussion because Samsung is about to launch its own thin phone, the Galaxy S25 Edge, which will give us a better real-world example of how much battery life to expect from a modern thin phone. But if the battery in a regular phone doesn't last long enough for you now, it's extremely unlikely one inside a thinner phone will do any better. The second question is more of a statement, but it's one I really wanted to address. Bring back the mini physical keyboard, a follower exclaimed. Well, I've got good news because the physical keyboard has already made a comeback. Take a look at Clicks, the company making physical keyboard cases for a variety of phones, including the iPhone and the Motorola Razr folding phones. The most recent revised model is excellent, with a far more refined typing experience and more modest learning curve. It's by far the best way to combine a physical keyboard with an up-to-date, no-compromise smartphone. Our final question is kind of along the same lines, as we're asked if there's any news on a full desktop mode for Android, where a phone can be connected to a keyboard, monitor and mouse, so you can work on it just like a desktop computer. There are options for this available today, such as Samsung's DeX and Motorola's Ready For features. But there's news coming out of a version being made by Google for Android called simply Desktop Mode. It has been spotted in beta versions of Android 16 and may require a Pixel smartphone to operate, but will allow a connection between a phone and an external monitor and then display a DeX-style desktop interface controlled by a keyboard and mouse connected to the phone using Bluetooth. Unfortunately, the feature is still a work in progress, and those examining the beta software don't expect it to be ready and therefore released with Android 16. At the moment, Samsung's excellent DeX feature is your best way to emulate a desktop experience with your phone. So that's it for mobile questions this week. Thanks so much for submitting them, and keep them coming, as I'm always happy to try and answer them. Now, back to Chris.
Thanks, Andy. That's going to do it for this week's episode of You Asked. We appreciate you so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to get those questions submitted and check back every Sunday morning to see if they were picked to be on the show. We'll see you in the next video.